Keanu Reeves hilariously destroys liberal TV host on live, her response left. Everyone speechless. What happens next will move everyone before we continue this story. Let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The stage was set for yet another night of witty banter and sharp political commentary. The talk show host, Clara Hawthorne, a well-known liberal figure with a sharp tongue, was ready to take on her next guest. The studio audience buzzed with anticipation, expecting a typical night of humor and controversy. Little did they know, tonight would be anything but typical. The camera panned across the vibrant set, where Clara stood confidently, holding her signature cue cards. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone playful yet pointed, "we have a very special guest tonight, a man who needs no introduction but deserves one anyway. Please welcome the one and only, Keanu Reeves." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause as Keanu stepped onto the stage. Dressed in his signature all-black ensemble, his relaxed demeanor immediately commanded the room. He waved humbly to the audience, his calm smile a stark contrast to Clara's sharp, animated energy. Clara greeted him with her trademark smirk. "Keanu, thank you for joining us. It's not every day we get someone like you, a Hollywood star who's remained shockingly silent on the issues that matter." Keanu chuckled softly, his voice low and measured. "Well, Clara, I try to let my actions speak louder than my words." The audience laughed lightly, but Clara's expression hinted at a challenge brewing. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Interesting. Let's see if those actions can keep up with my words tonight." Keanu's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. "Let's find out." The air grew electric as the audience settled in, sensing that this conversation would be anything but ordinary. Clara wasted no time diving into the conversation. Her tone was casual, but her words carried an edge. "Keanu, you've been in the public eye for decades, yet you've somehow managed to stay quiet. In a world where everyone has an opinion, don't you think silence can be dangerous?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, his signature calm demeanor intact. "Clara," he began, his voice carrying a sense of quiet authority, "sometimes silence isn't about avoidance, it's about observation. When you're too busy talking, you might miss what's truly important." The audience murmured in agreement, but Clara wasn't ready to back down. She tapped her cue cards lightly on the desk and smirked. "Observation is great, but action is better. Surely someone with your influence can do more than watch." Keanu smiled faintly, the kind that hinted he saw through her tactics. "I agree. Action matters. But action without understanding can do more harm than good, wouldn't you say?" Clara's smirk faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Fair point," she conceded. "But let's talk specifics. There's been a lot of chatter about Hollywood elites staying out of real issues. Some might even call it cowardice. What do you say to that?" The audience gasped softly at the boldness of her question, but Keanu didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze meeting hers. "I'd say it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. True bravery isn't in shouting louder. It's in doing the work quietly and letting the results speak for themselves." The room grew quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. Clara hesitated, her usual confidence seeming to waver. The audience, meanwhile, leaned in closer, sensing the tension rising. Keanu had just drawn the first line in what promised to be an unforgettable exchange. Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to press harder. The tension in the room was palpable, and the audience sat at the edge of their seats, eager to see how this battle of wits would unfold. "Well, Keanu," Clara began, her tone sharp but still carrying a hint of playfulness, "that's a convenient answer, isn't it? You talk about quiet work and results, but let's be honest. Hollywood is built on visibility. Don't you think staying silent makes you complicit in some of the problems we see today?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, his expression calm yet thoughtful. He clasped his hands together and let the silence linger for a moment before replying. "I think it's easy to confuse visibility with impact, Clara. Just because something is loud doesn't mean it's meaningful. The work I do, whether it's through philanthropy or personal connections, doesn't need a spotlight to matter." The audience broke into a smattering of applause, but Clara wasn't done yet. "But don't you think that by staying quiet, you're avoiding accountability? People want to know where you stand. Isn't that part of being a public figure?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Clara, I don't think being a public figure means I owe everyone an opinion on everything. If anything, it means I have a responsibility to act with integrity, not just to talk for the sake of talking. Clara chuckled, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Integrity, huh? That's a nice buzzword. But what about when integrity demands taking a stand, even if it's unpopular? Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice calm but firm. Taking a stand isn't about jumping into every argument or shouting from every platform. It's about staying true to your values, even when it's not flashy or popular. The room erupted into applause, Clara visibly flustered for the first time. The audience could feel the dynamic beginning to shift, and the anticipation for what came next only grew. Clara adjusted her posture, the smile on her face growing tighter. She wasn't used to her guests maintaining this level of composure under pressure, and it was clear she needed to change. Her approach. The audience, sensing the subtle tension, watched intently as the exchange unfolded. "All right, Keanu," Clara said, tapping her pen against the desk. "Let's get real here. You talk about values and integrity, but we've all seen the headlines. Hollywood is full of people hiding behind vague answers while the world burns. Don't you think people deserve more from someone in your position?" Keanu let out a soft laugh, his demeanor still as calm as ever. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, "the world doesn't need more opinions. It needs more understanding, more empathy, and more action. Headlines are just noise. Real change happens away from the cameras." The audience clapped in agreement, but Clara wasn't ready to let him off the hook. "That's easy to say when you're not the one facing criticism. But let me ask you this. Do you think staying silent makes you part of the solution or part of the problem?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Silence isn't the same as inaction, Clara, and it's definitely not complicity. Sometimes the loudest voices are the ones doing the least. I'd rather focus on the work than on making headlines." The crowd murmured in approval, but Clara wasn't backing down. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "So, you're saying those who speak out are wasting their time?" Keanu shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Not at all. I'm saying that everyone has a role to play. Some people raise awareness, others take action behind the scenes. Both are important, but shouting louder doesn't make your role more valuable." The audience erupted into applause, Clara's frustration barely hidden behind her practiced smile. Keanu had turned her question into a lesson, and it was clear she wasn't expecting it. Clara's smile faltered, but she quickly masked it with a laugh, leaning back in her chair as if to reclaim her confidence. The energy in the room had shifted. Keanu's composed demeanor and pointed responses were resonating not just with the audience, but with everyone watching from home. Still, Clara wasn't ready to concede. "All right, Keanu," she said, her tone laced with playful skepticism. "Let's talk about accountability. You've built a reputation as the good guy of Hollywood, but surely even you can admit that being neutral can sometimes look like taking the easy way out. Isn't that a convenient way to avoid the tough conversations?" Keanu's expression didn't waver. He sat forward slightly, his calm gaze meeting Clara's. "Clara, neutrality isn't about avoiding tough conversations, it's about approaching the sake of reacting. I believe in taking the time to understand the full picture before jumping in." The audience broke into light applause, but Clara pressed on, determined to regain control. "That's a nice sentiment, but in today's world, silence often gets interpreted as agreement. Don't you think people have a right to know where you stand?" Keanu smiled faintly, his voice steady. "People have a right to expect honesty and integrity. They don't have a right to demand performance. My actions reflect my beliefs far better than words ever could. And if someone wants to judge me, I'd rather it be on what I've done, not what I've said." The audience erupted in louder applause this time, the momentum clearly shifting in Keanu's favor. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her usual confidence starting to crack. "And what about when people think you're avoiding accountability?" Clara added, her tone sharper now. Keanu leaned back, his expression calm but firm. "Accountability isn't about appeasing critics, Clara. It's about staying true to your values, even when it's not what people want to hear. And I'm okay with that." The tension in the room grew thick as Clara realized she was losing ground. The audience, however, was captivated, sensing that the tides had fully turned in Keanu's favor. Clara's frustration began to seep through her polished exterior. She adjusted her cue cards, her smile becoming more forced. Meanwhile, Keanu sat relaxed, his calm energy only highlighting the growing imbalance in the exchange. The audience was no longer just spectators, they were firmly on his side. "All right, Keanu," Clara said, her voice carrying an edge of defiance. "You keep talking about values and actions. But let's be honest, the world doesn't just need quiet heroes. It needs people who take bold, public stands. Don't you think your silence could be seen as indifference?" Keanu nodded thoughtfully, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of his chair. "I understand how it might look that way, Clara. But I've never believed that shouting louder solves problems. In fact, sometimes the noise drowns out the solutions." The audience burst into applause, and Clara's smile tightened further. She glanced briefly at the crowd, clearly aware that she was losing their favor. "But surely," she pressed, "you can't deny that public figures like you have a platform, a responsibility to influence positive change. Doesn't staying silent waste that opportunity?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, his voice steady. "A platform is a tool, Clara, not a weapon. How you use it matters. For me, it's not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about making sure what I do has real impact. Words are fleeting, but actions leave a legacy." The audience erupted into cheers, several members rising to their feet. Clara shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable but refusing to back down. "So you're saying those who speak out are wasting their time?" she shot back, her tone sharp. Keanu smiled, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Not at all. I'm saying that words without action are just noise. If you want to make a difference, you have to back up what you say with what you do." The crowd roared in approval, and Clara's confidence visibly wavered. The momentum was now entirely with Keanu, and the audience could feel that he was steering the conversation toward a powerful climax. Clara's polished composure was cracking. Her eyes darted across her cue cards, as if searching for a new angle. The audience could sense her struggle, but her determination to regain control of the conversation was evident. Keanu, on the other hand, remained completely at ease, exuding the kind of calm that was both infuriating and captivating. "Keanu," Clara began, her voice firmer now, "let's cut to the chase. You've built this image of being the thoughtful, quiet hero, but some might argue that it's just a convenient way to stay out of trouble. Isn't it easier to stay quiet and avoid taking risks?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Clara, life isn't about avoiding risks. It's about choosing the right ones. I don't stay quiet to avoid trouble. I do it because I believe in acting with intention. Words can stir people up, but actions can change their lives." The audience applauded loudly, and Clara's lips tightened into a thin smile. She wasn't used to being on the back foot, but she wasn't ready to give up. "But don't you think that sometimes the world needs a little stirring up? That staying silent can look like ignoring the problems around you?" Keanu chuckled softly, his voice calm and deliberate. "I don't ignore the problems, Clara. I face them in the way I know best, by doing the work, not just talking about it. Stirring things up might get attention, but solving problems takes patience and persistence." Clara's frustration was now evident. She leaned in, her tone growing sharper. "But what about accountability? You think silence makes it harder for people to know where you stand?" Keanu's faint smile returned. "Accountability isn't about announcing your stance on everything. It's about living in a way that reflects your values, even when no one is watching. People might not always know where I stand, but my actions speak for themselves." The audience erupted into thunderous applause, Clara's attempts to corner Keanu failing spectacularly. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and even she seemed to realize it. Keanu's quiet confidence was proving far more compelling than her aggressive questioning, and the audience was firmly in his corner. Clara adjusted her microphone and leaned forward, determination flickering in her eyes. She was running out of angles, but she wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. The audience, now fully on Keanu's side, buzzed with anticipation. They sensed that the conversation was building towards something big. "Keanu," Clara said, her tone sharper than before, "you've talked a lot about values and actions, but let's address the elephant in the room. Don't you think your approach is passive? People look up to you. Isn't it your duty to lead by being vocal, by standing up publicly for what's right?" Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his calm, steady gaze never leaving hers. "Clara," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "leadership isn't about making noise. It's about making a difference. Some people inspire through words, and that's important, but I've always believed that the most powerful leadership comes from example." The audience broke into applause again, their support growing louder with each word. Clara's frustration was becoming more visible, her attempts to control the narrative slipping through her fingers. "But don't you think staying quiet can be dangerous?" she countered, her voice tinged with exasperation. "There are people out there who need to hear from someone like you. Silence can sometimes look like complicity." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, pausing for a moment before answering. "You're right. People need voices, but they need the right voices. I don't speak on everything because I believe in speaking only when I have something meaningful to add. Otherwise, I focus on taking action. Words without purpose can do more harm than good." The audience erupted into cheers, some even standing to applaud. Clara opened her mouth to retort, but quickly realized she was fighting a losing battle. Keanu had flipped the narrative entirely, and the crowd's energy was now electric with admiration for his wisdom and composure. The momentum was entirely his, and Clara seemed to know it. Yet, she wasn't ready to concede defeat, at least not yet. Clara's resolve hardened, and her smile tightened into something resembling defiance. She leaned forward, her tone now sharper, as if this was her last chance to regain control of the conversation. The audience's loyalty had visibly shifted to Keanu, but she wasn't ready to let him walk away unchallenged. "All right, Keanu," she said, her voice edged with determination. "Let's talk specifics. You've mentioned actions and values, but let's get real. In today's world, staying neutral is often seen as avoiding accountability. Don't you think neutrality can sometimes be harmful?" Keanu's expression softened, though his gaze remained steady. "Clara, neutrality isn't about avoiding accountability. It's about being thoughtful in your actions. Sometimes rushing to pick a side does more harm than good. I believe in taking the time to truly understand before acting." The audience applauded again, their support unwavering. Clara's frustration was evident now, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "But what about the perception, Keanu? People don't always see what's happening behind the scenes. Don't you think they deserve clarity from someone in your position?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone calm, yet firm. "Clarity isn't about explaining every move you make, Clara. It's about consistency. If people look at my life, they'll see where I stand. Not because I've told them, but because I've shown them." The audience erupted into cheers once more, Clara visibly faltering. She attempted to maintain her composure, but the cracks were showing. "And what about responsibility?" she asked, her voice raised slightly. "Don't you feel a responsibility to use your platform more openly?" Keanu's faint smile returned. "I feel a responsibility to live authentically, to act with purpose, and to contribute meaningfully. A platform is a tool, not an obligation to perform." The crowd's cheers grew louder, Clara now visibly out of options. The tension in the room was electric, and everyone. Keanu had not only held his ground, but had completely shifted the narrative in his favor. Clara exhaled deeply, her polished facade barely holding together. She glanced at her notes one last time, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of her desk. The audience was no longer on her side, and the energy in the room had shifted entirely toward Keanu. It was clear this was her final chance to regain some ground. "All right, Keanu," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and resignation. "You've made it clear where you stand, or rather how you act, but let me ask you, don't you think people want more? In a world full of loud voices, isn't staying quiet just another way of avoiding responsibility?" Keanu paused for a moment, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. Then he leaned forward, his expression calm but resolute. "Clara, responsibility isn't about volume, it's about impact. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs more thoughtful action. I believe in speaking when it matters and acting when it counts. That's how I live, and that's how I lead." The audience erupted into a standing ovation, their applause drowning out any further attempts Clara might have made to respond. Keanu's composure and measured responses had not only won the room but had turned what started as a grilling into a masterclass in dignity and authenticity. Clara attempted a strained smile, her voice slightly trembling as she turned back to the camera. Well, there you have it, folks. Keanu Reeves, proving once again why he's Hollywood's most elusive yet impactful figure. Keanu smiled politely, giving a humble nod to the audience as the cameras zoomed in on his face. "Thanks for having me, Clara," he said softly, his voice filled with genuine sincerity. "It's been enlightening as—" The credits rolled. The crowd continued to cheer, and Clara sat back in her chair, visibly defeated yet trying to maintain her professionalism. Keanu's quiet strength had spoken louder than any argument, leaving the world with a lesson in grace under fire. The next morning, clips of the interview dominated social media. Hashtags like Sir Keanu Speaks and Sec Keanu Destroys went viral, with fans and critics alike dissecting every word and moment. Once again, Keanu Reeves had shown the world that actions and measured words truly speak louder than anything else.